In the previous video, we talked about how to import wheel logs and how to create wheel sections, and how do we actually add wheels and delete wheels and configure the wheel sections. Now let's look at so in the last video we actually created a tool, this kind of wheel fences, right? One of them actually goes from C3 to A16, right? That's this one. And then the other one goes from C7 to A15, C7 to A15. We created these two wheel fences, right? And then we were examining the wheel logs. So the three logs we are looking at is gamma, gamma ray, permeability, and porosity, right? And we have our own template, which is called GR perm pore, right? And this is the wheel section window. This is the wheel section window, and it's a very important window. So on the menu bar, there are two tabs that's kind of important. One is the stratigraphy tab. Right? The stratigraphy tab contains some buttons that allows us to make adjustments to the wheel sections. For example, if you go to the 3D window, or if you go to the 2D window, you have this X section editing toolbox. If you click on it, then it's going to allow you to make adjustment to the cross section. Right? So let's still go back to the viewing mode. Right. And we looked at this new wheel section window button. Right. If you click on it, it's going to create a new wheel section window, just like this one. Right. And then later on, you can add wheels to it. You can use select a particular template, that kind of thing. Right. And there's another menu item that's very important. Which is this window. Right. If you click on it, it's gonna open a wheel section ribbon that contains lots of tabs, lots of buttons on it. Right. We looked at this kind of a context-sensitive menu item before, window, right? If we click on any of the 3D window, right, or if we click on any of the 2D window, then this context-aware window menu item is going to contain a different set of buttons that's related to the operations in this 3D window. Right? If we click on a 2D window, and then here it's going to show 2D, and then the ribbon is going to contain all the buttons that's related to two-dimensional operations inside of this 2D window. Right? And then if we click on the wheel section window, right, and then we see wheel section here. See, it's not 3D, it's not 2D, but it's called a wheel section now, right? And then it contains lots of buttons that's related to operations inside this wheel section window, in this particular window, right? In this particular window. Right. So here we have like so let's take a look at this particular ribbon. It's got lots of sections, right? The first section is called templates. Right? Later on, we're going to look at those templates, right? And then cross section, right? And then visualization, and then a bunch of buttons controlling and options that's going to control the vertical scaling, controlling the horizontal scaling, and then annotations and stuff. Let's forget about this part of the things, right? Let's just focus on the front part of all the buttons, right? And then some of the buttons in this ribbon are actually duplicated on this toolbar, right? So if you sort of pay attention to, for example, the new template button, which is also here, right? And then this box is the same as this box here, which allows you to select a template from existing templates. Here, grperm_pool is a template that we created by ourselves, right? But if you want to choose a different template, you can sort of either go here, or you can click here, right? And then this is called the template setting, right? It's going to allow you to actually adjust the template that you are using right now, the grperm_pool, right? It's called template setting, and template setting button is also here. And then right next to it is called cross-correlation, cross-section setting, the cross-section setting, right? This button is sort of identical to this button, right? It also allows you to so if you have a deviated whale, then this allows you to make adjustment to that, right? And then a bunch of buttons here, right? Sync scrolling, sync scaling, these two buttons, and this lock. We're going to look at those things here. Undef here, undef here. It's so lots of the buttons on the ribbon are actually duplicated on the toolbar, right? So you can use either one of them to make adjustments, right? So if you have a good memory, you probably remember that you've seen this button before, right? The X section editing. The X section editing. You saw this button, the same button on the stratigraphy, under the stratigraphy tab, right? The ribbon for the stratigraphy. You also have X section editing. And I was saying that if you are in the whale section window, the X section editing under the stratigraphy tab is going to be grayed out. It's not going to allow you to edit the cross section, right? But why the Windows under the Windows tab, the X section editing is active, right? Why is it active? Right? If you click on it, it's going to give you this toolbar, right? It's going to give you this toolbar. But you may have noticed that the X section add whale, edit whale, and delete whale, these first three buttons are grayed out, right? But you have some other things called curve filling, and these two buttons are for editing whale tops. These two buttons are active, and together with some other buttons that allows you to actually change the display of the tracks, the display of the logs, right? The reason that this button is active is because under this particular whale section window, you need to use those buttons, and those buttons are actually grouped together into this particular X section editing toolbox, right? But if you are in a stratigraphy, this is grayed out because the toolbox only contains three buttons, right? The buttons for adding wheels, that kind of thing. If you go to a three-dimensional window, right, this thing is active now. If you click on it, you see. So this add wheel, edit wheel, delete wheel, these three buttons are active, right? The reason that this one is sort of grayed out is because we don't really have a cross section that's active now, right? But if you click on it, if you select the one, then you can make it active, right? So let's still go back to the window, right? And then let's go back to the whale section window, and let's look at how we can actually look at this kind of log data in this whale section window, right? The different ways for doing that. The first thing we might want to do is to put on the whale tops, right? So inside of this particular window, we see a gray checkbox in front of plane A. That's our whale top data that just imported, right? If we want to see the whale top data, we can just click on it. Then it's going to display those colored lines, right? And those colored lines are going to tell us the name of those imported whale tops, right? They are basically corresponding to horizons, basically, right? And if we want to sort of look up and down, right, what we can do is to actually can do this. So what we have to do is to sort of first click on this button, select pick mode, right? And then we can sort of move our cursor into this this SSTVD, this the so-called index track. It's basically a depth track, right? Index track. And then if we just hold down the left button, and then move up and down, then we will be able to actually move the logs up and down. The reason you are seeing a delay is just because my computer is kind of slow, but on a normal computer, it should be sort of quite smooth. It should be quite a smooth experience. Right? The same is true here, for here. Right? So on any of those wheel, you have this kind of depth track, right? And then you can sort of scroll up and down. Scroll up and down. And to move around, right? And as you actually scroll up and down, you're gonna see the depth track or this index track has two kind of colors. One is just the white, right? And then you also have a gray region. And between these two regions, you have a horizontal bar here, right? So if you move your cursor to that separation line between the gray region and the white region, move your cursor over there, right? You're gonna see that the cursor actually changes shape. It changed from a small hand to this kind of cursor, right? And at this point, if you hold down the left button, and then if you just drag, you're gonna see the logs being zoomed in and out, right? Right. You basically change the scale. You're changing the vertical scale of this of all the logs, right? So that's basically how you use a cursor inside of the. How do you use the mouse inside of the wheel section window, right? So the utilities are kind of the three buttons actually have different kind of functionalities, right? And one thing that you may have noticed is that if I move my cursor inside of one of those wheels, the other two wheels moves with it, right? They are not moving separately. They are moving in sync, right? And then when I do a scaling inside of one of those wheels, for example, if I do a scaling inside of this particular wheel, then the other two wheels also scales with me, with the middle wheel, right? This is because you have these two buttons that's enabled, right? And these two buttons also appears in the toolbar. So if you want to do a scaling or shifting, or scaling or scrolling for just one wheel. For example, if I just want to scroll on the middle wheel, I can just disable this particular button, right? And then at this point, if I just scroll here, scroll here, and then only this wheel, the logs in this wheel are gonna move up and down, right? Right. But if I do a scaling inside this wheel, and then all three wheels move together, right? This is because you still have this button enabled. That's synchronized scaling. And if you disable it, then if you just scale on this particular wheel, the other two wheels are not going to change. It's not going to change, right? So these two buttons allow you to sort of scroll in sync or scale in sync, right? These two buttons. And if you actually pay attention to all the numbers underneath the header information of each of the log file, of each of the wheel, right? You may have noticed that in addition to gamma, perm, porosity, you have SSTVD. And then underneath it, it's the scale, right? That's the scale. And then for different wheel, this scale is actually different, right? So for C3, it's 1 to 1924. And then for B9, it's 1 to 5888. And then for A16, it's 1 to 1229, right? So the scale for the 3 different whales are actually different. Right? And it may be sort of advantageous in some situations, right? But sometimes you would like to actually to have the same scale for all the different whales. And if that's the case, you also have a button for that. That's this button, equalize scales. So align scales of all whales to one common scale. And again, this button is duplicated here, equalize scales, right? If you click on it, then everyone is going to have the same scale. So it's for now, it's like a 1 to 30, 14. Right? It's 1 to 30, 14 for every whale. Right? That's exactly the same scale. Right? And if you don't like this particular scale, you can choose your own scale. Right? You have a box here, and then if you click on this thing, then it's going to allow you to actually either select a scale, for example, or you can just enter your own scale, right? Suppose you want to do like 3,000, right? Right. Then everyone is scaled to 3,000. Right. And then if you want to, now you can still scale it, right? So you you typed 3,000 here, but if you want to scale it, you can still move your cursor to this horizontal line and then scale it. And as soon as you scale it, it's going to be a different scale, right? Now you have changed it to like 3,300, right? So let's still change it back to like 3,000. Right? If you want to prevent this kind of a change into your vertical scale, you can just click on this lock. This lock is going to allow you to lock the scale. If you click on it, then you won't be able to change it. So if you still move your cursor to here, you're going to see a stop sign, right? It's like a red circle. It's like a big red circle. It shows you that you cannot actually scale this whale log anymore, right? So if you click on this lock, you're going to lock the vertical scale. So that's sort of related to the vertical scale, right? And then you also have the horizontal scaling here. See, you have a section that's called horizontal scaling. Horizontal scaling basically controls the separation between the two the different whales. So here, these two whales, C3 and B9, are separated by like 3,207 meters, right? And then this is separated by like 1,271 meters. And how do you actually control the separation between the three different whales, right? So here, for example, if you choose constant, right, and then the separation between each of the different whales are going to be fixed at this value, right? You can choose a different value. So if you choose 50, then the separation between different whales are going to be fixed at 50 millimeter, 5 centimeters, basically, right? If you choose 25, then all the whales are going to be separated by like 25 millimeters. So regardless how far away these two whales are in reality. Right? And if you choose relative, then it's going to allow you to select a scale. So now it's like 50,000, right? So it's a 1 to 50,000, 1 to 50,000, right? So B9 and A16 are closer together. So visually, they are separated by a smaller distance, right? Because you are using a relative scale with this particular 50,000 scale. Right? And again, these two boxes are duplicated here, right, on the toolbar. Depending upon your preference, you can use either one, use this one or this one. Right? And then there's one more thing. That's these three buttons: fit to height, fit dynamic, and fit to width. Right. So if you want to sort of see all the logs, they're in their entire range, entire depth range, right? You can click on fit to height. And this way you're going to be able to see the complete logs. No, it's not exactly true. It's fit to height. Fit to width, then you will be able to actually separate all the to fill the entire screen with the logs of the three whales, right? And then fit dynamic. It's going to make this kind of dynamic adjustment to allow you to see part of the whales, part of the logs, basically. Right. So in this case, it's not a display of the entire log. So B9 is actually a lot longer than the other two logs, right? It's a lot longer. And it's not trying to display the entire thing. It's not trying to display the entire thing. Okay. So let's still go back to fit dynamic. Okay, so that's all the kind of functionalities that's related to the display of the logs, right? And then sometimes people want to flatten those logs based upon a certain wheel top, right? If that's what you really want to do, you can sort of click on the wheel top, right click on it, and then you'll be able to find a option that's called flatten wheel section on wheel top, right? And then if you click on it, you're going to see that the logs, all the logs from all whales has been shifted to make sure that base Cretaceous, this particular whale top, is flat. Right. And sometimes if you want to sort of flatten all the whale logs based upon, for example, the bottom, you can right click on it and flatten whale section on whale top, right? If that's the case, and then you'll see top eave is flattened across all the whales, right? So let's unflatten whale section. That's some of the capabilities of Petrel for you to actually display the whale logs in different ways. Right? And how to actually make adjustments, to the display. And then for this kind of analysis, based on looking at the logs for different whales, there are three settings dialogs that are very important. So the first settings dialog is the so-called Windows, the Windows settings. That's this particular button. And you can also see this Windows settings Windows settings button also under this. So where is it? So Windows settings, right? You can also see it here, Windows settings. If you click on it, it's going to bring up this kind of dialog box for settings that's related to this particular window, this particular wheel section window, right? I'll come back to that later. I'll come back to that later, to this particular dialog box later. That's the first settings dialog box. That's very important, and that's related to this particular window. And there's a second one that's very important, which is this cross-section settings, which is the same as this button here. And if you click on it, for some reason it's taking, oh, okay, now it's back. Right. And again, another dialog box, right? If you click on the definition tab, it's gonna allow you to change settings that's related to this particular object, cross-section. This is almost like a data object, right? So this cross-section settings dialog box, which is located right here, right? Oh, here. It's also very, very important because it adjusts the cross-section data that's underneath this particular display window, right? And then there's a third settings dialog box, which is the template setting. And this button is also duplicated here, template settings. Right? If you click on it, you're going to see the settings dialog box for template. Right? And the template we are using here is gr_perm_pro, right? And this settings dialog box is going to allow us to make adjustments to the display of the logs. So this dialog box basically controls how the logs are going to be displayed, right? So we'll come back to that later. So these three dialog boxes are very, very important for us to be effective when doing this kind of stratigraphy and wheel correlation analysis, right? But let's first take a look at this particular Windows settings dialog box, right? And see what's actually inside of it, just to find out what's actually inside of it. The Windows section, Windows settings dialog box basically duplicates lots of capabilities that's already inside of the that's already accounted for by all the buttons in the Windows ribbon. If you sort of look at it, it's a kind of has lots of similarities, right? So it's got like an info tab. So you can change the window name. So for now, its default name is wheel section window 1, but you can change it to something that you like, right? You can add comments to it, right? The color change may not be very effective. It's not really that useful. The wheel section, the type, you don't want to change it, right? You don't want to change it. And in fact, you cannot change it. You cannot change it, right? So this part is that's the info tab. And then you have definitions tab, right? The definition tab. The definition tab has a bunch of options that's kind of very useful. So the first part is flatten on what, right? It allows you to actually shift the logs so that they can be flattened with respect to a certain reference, right? So now you can sort of see all the wheels are being flattened on base Cretaceous, this particular wheel top, right? And then this dialog box, the boxes here actually reflects this kind of a flattening option, right? So flatten on wheel top, and then you can see base Cretaceous, plan A, right? But suppose you don't want to sort of flatten on base Cretaceous, right? Of course, you can go back to the input pane and then right-click on one of those horizons underneath stratigraphic. Right-click on it and then select flatten on that wheel top, right? That's what we looked at, right? If I want to flatten on top starboard, I can right-click on it and then flatten wheel section on wheel top. Then everything is going to be flattened on top starboard, that kind of thing, right? But if the Windows setting also allows us to adjust that to make changes, right? Flatten on wheel top. You see this kind of arrow here, this blue arrow. So this blue arrow allows us to point anything that's in the input pane into this box. Right. Suppose we would like to actually use top eve as a flattening wheel top. We can just select top eve in the input pane. Right. And then we can just click on this blue arrow. Now it has changed to top eve plane A. Right. And then if we click on apply, then in the wheel section window, you can see top eve. All the wheels, all the logs has been flattened with respect to top eve. And then later on, in many dialog boxes, you're going to see this kind of blue arrow. And this blue arrow allows you to select any object in the input pane and then just point it into that box this blue arrow is pointing to. Right. So let's still go back to base Cretaceous and then use blue arrow and then apply. Right. Now it's flattened on base Cretaceous. But flattening on wheel tops is just one of those options. If you click on this arrow, you're going to see, for example, no synchronization. Screw relative. Flatten from window top. That's going to flatten on the top, basically the wheel heads, basically. And then flatten on depth, for example. Right? Flatten on depth. So you can pick a certain depth, for example, let's flatten on what? On 1800, for example. 1800 subsea true vertical depth, if we apply that, then 1800 SSTVD 1800 is going to be the surface for flattening. And then everything else is going to be shifted to with respect to this particular true vertical depth. Right? And then flatten on wheel top, that allows you to select just one wheel top. And then flatten on multiple wheel tops are going to involve some kind of scaling, right? So you now have like two things, right? Flatten on multiple wheel top. And the wheel tops collection, suppose I select plane A, and let's see if it's going to work. The selected data must be a wheel trace. So there must be something that I missed here. But let's not explore that for now. Let's just still go back to flatten on wheel top and then use the base Cretaceous. Right? And that's how you actually synchronize all the different wheels so that they flatten on a particular surface, right? And then in the second part, wheel scale synchronization, right? So for now, split header and wheel section is like selected. If you don't select it, do you see the gray line here? Do you see the gray line here? If you don't select it and apply, and then that gray line is just going to disappear, right? Sometimes you may have very thick head information, right? And if that's the case, it might be good to just split it, right? And synchronize wheel scaling, it's kind of equivalent to one of those buttons, synchronize scaling, right? Synchronize scrolling, synchronize scaling. And then you have this wheel settings. For now, these three wheels are being selected for this particular wheel section window, right? And then here you can choose the domain. So the domain is basically just this particular index track, that's the depth, right? But SSTVD is like the default value, right? But you can also choose MD or TVD or two-way travel time, that kind of thing, right? If it's actually in you can convert it into time domain by using a velocity model. Right? And the scale setting now it's locked to 1 to 1 3000. Right? You can get rid of the lock, which is similar to actually click on this button. Right? And then you can change the scale here to whatever number that you wanna change. Right? And then you have this X section setting. So this button is going to be identical to this button. So for this particular box, it's displaying these 3 whales, right? But while it's kind of grayed out, you cannot actually change those whales, right? Suppose you want to add a whale or delete a whale, how do you actually do that, right? This Windows setting box, dialog box, is not going to allow you to do that. In order to actually change the whales that makes up this particular whale fence or whale section, you have to go to the X section settings dialog box, which is the dialog box that we're going to explain next, right? But let's if we click on this button, it's just going to bring up that particular dialog box. Right? It's going to bring up this particular dialog box, and here you can change the whales, for example, if you want to add more whales to it, or if you want to delete whales, that kind of thing. But let's not get into that right now. Let's keep looking at this particular dialog box. Right, that's basically everything on the definition tab. If you go to the layout tab, then you can sort of control the horizontal spacing. Right, and this part of the dialog box is kind of similar to this part. Right, is it relative or is it constant? And then you can change the scale. Panel splitting is kind of useful when you are dealing with horizontal whales, but for our case, we don't really have horizontal whales now. So let's not look into that, right? And then set up a paper. This part is basically for printing purposes, right? Sometimes you want to print out a hard copy of the whale logs that you have sort of worked on, right? And here you can set up the paper, set up the configurations for the printer, and then or you can just print out the entire screen into a PDF file, basically, right? Petrel also has that kind of option, allows you to actually print it to a PDF file. So now let's click on cancel, right? So that's basically the Windows setting, the Windows settings, right? The Windows settings dialog box, and what this particular button can be used for, right? And now let's look at the X section settings. Let's look at this part. So this dialog box are going to allow us to actually make changes to this particular object here in the input pane, right? What I was saying that this thing is almost like a data, right? And that's why it's inside of the input pane, right? And the data that's inside of it contains, for example, the whales inside of it, right? So if you look at the info, you can change the name here. The color may not be particularly useful. Type is an X section, right? Cross section. That's like fixed, and you don't really want to change that. Statistics. It shows you some minimum, maximum, and range of X, Y, and depths. Basically. That's basically the logs. Logs X and Y are just the locations, right? Easting and northing of those whales, and depths is actually the range of those whales, basically. Right. So the whales actually go from like a minus 1732 to minus 2990, right? Minus 2990. Minus 2990 is probably B9, I think. Minus 1732. Uh, 1732. But anyway, that's just some statistics about the whales. Right? Style. sometimes those kind of a wheel section, this kind of a wheel section can be used to display a cross section of a volume data. Right? Suppose you have seismic data, which is actually a three-dimensional volume, right? And this kind of wheel fence is actually cutting through that three-dimensional volume. And you can actually control how that three-dimensional volume can be displayed onto this particular wheel fence, this kind of two-dimensional cross-section thing, right? And these are configurations that's related to those things, right? But let's not get into this part yet, right? Later on, we're gonna sort of once we actually start to deal with volume data, we can start to sort of look into that. Probably the most important tab is definitions tab, right? And this definitions tab allows you to actually change the wheels. Right? So for now, it's C3, B9, and A16, right? So as I click on those wheel names, some of the buttons on the left side lights up, right? So this blue arrow is going to allow you to move the selected wheel up and down. So if I move C3 down one position, then it's going to be B9, C3, and A16. So at this point, if I click on apply, then these two wheels inside of the wheel section are going to switch positions. So B9 comes first, and C3 comes next, right? So this kind of thing allows you, so these buttons allows you to actually shift the relative positions of the wheels and how they are actually displayed in the wheel section window. Right. So suppose I still, if I actually change the positions of those three wheels, if I go back to the 3D window, for example, you're going to see that the wheel fence also changes shape, right? The wheel fence also changes shape. So at the beginning, it was just like a C9, C3, B9, and then A16, right? But now because you have B9, C3, A16, so the starting point is going to be B9, right? So it's going to go from B9 to C3 and then go to A16. So you're going to see a bend here, a very sharp bend actually. Right, B9 is right here. And then you have to go from B9 to C3. That's right here. Right, so you can sort of see a dashed line here. This dashed line, and then comes back. That's a bend. That's a very sharp bend, right? So you actually have changed the shape of the wheel fence, right? So let's still move C3 back to the top, right? And then let's still click on apply. Right, now it looks better. That dashed line has disappeared, right? So it goes from C3 to B9 to A16. And then you can also add wheels to it, right? For now, it goes from like a C4 to B9 to A16. Suppose I want to add A10 to this particular wheel section. So how can I do that, right? Again, you see this blue arrow. We used the blue arrow to select a particular wheel top into the into the flattening dialog box, right? How do you actually flatten with respect to a particular wheel top, right? So now suppose we select A10 here. We select A10, and then we can use this arrow to point it into this particular wheel fence, right? So now A10 is here. The reason that it's inserted at this particular position is because C3 was active before, and then I clicked on the blue arrow. So the new wheel is going to be added underneath the currently active wheel, right? But suppose we want to move A10 to like the bottom, we can just do that, right? And then if we click on apply, then our wheel fence is going to go from C3 to B9 to A16 and then go to A10. So we have 4 wheels in our wheel fence. And if we go to the wheel section window, we should be able to see 1 more wheels. That's sort of in the end, right? But here I'll just use fit to width. So now I can see A10 here. That's a wheel that's just added, right? And then if I want to delete a particular wheel, for example, I want to delete A10, all I have to do is to click on this thing, remove hinge from X section. If I delete it and then apply, then A10 is going to disappear, right? So this is actually copying some of the, if you have selected, for example, if you have selected other wheels, right, you can sort of copy the hinge to the end of the cross section. So you can just sort of concatenate those additional hinges, what they call, right, to the end of this particular fence. So if you put your if you make the default wheel fence setting active, then it's going to show you the template, right? The template that's being used for displaying the logs inside of each wheel. That's gr perm port, a template that we created by ourselves, right? And then there's a button here. That's the template setting. So if you click on this button, it's equivalent to click on this button. It's going to open the third extremely important settings dialog box. That's the template settings, right? If you click on it, then it's going to bring up this particular dialog box, which is going to allow us to adjust how the logs are going to be displayed inside of each wheel, right? But let's not get into that right now. Right? And this is actually the template that's we are using for displaying the logs inside of every wheel in this particular wheel fence, right? But suppose you want to use different templates for different wheels. C3, for example, right? If you click on C3, then underneath the template section, use default is automatically checked. The default is what? The default is the gr perm port. That it's this particular template, right? That's the default, right? But if for different wheels you would like to use different templates, then you have to sort of uncheck this box, and then go on to select some other templates. Right? Suppose you select lithology for C3, right? You have selected lithology for C3, this thing, and then if you click on apply, then it's gonna use the lithology template to display the logs in C3. The reason that you are not seeing any of the logs is because this particular lithology template probably does not contain gamma, perm, or porosity, right? Maybe it's a bad example. If I use a triple combo, do I see anything? Still nothing, right? But the idea is that you can choose different templates. You can choose different templates for different wheels. Right? You don't really have to actually stick with just the one template for all wheels inside of a one wheel fence, right? Those two sections are for things that might be too complicated for us to sort of get into right now. Right? And then you also can account for deviated tracks. And you can configure the header, how it's displayed. Let me click on cancel so I don't make any unnecessary changes in this particular dialog box. Right. And that's the second very important settings dialog box, right? I was saying window settings, and then cross-section settings. Right? Window settings allows you to control the window, the wheel section window here. The cross-section settings, or this button here, allows you to actually configure this particular cross-section object here, right? And then one last very important settings dialog box is the template settings. And the template settings is going to configure how the logs are going to be displayed inside each wheel, right? We probably won't be able to sort of finish talking about the template settings dialog box in this video, right? But let's just take a look at what's inside of this dialog box, right? Again, you have an info tab, right? You can change the name, the color, wheel section template. You don't want to change this part, right? The most important thing is the wheel section template tab, right? And underneath this tab, you can sort of see you have different levels of objects, right? So on the top level, you have something that's called vertical tracks, right? So you have an index track. The index track actually corresponds to the column that's SSTVD here, right? And then you have a track that's called a gamma. The gamma is basically this particular track, right? But underneath this particular track, you also have a gamma, right? That's underneath the gamma track. So if you see the rails, right, those rails, it's called a track. And then underneath the track, you also have a curve, right? So this object gamma here actually controls the curve, how the curve is going to be displayed inside of the track, right? And then you also have a perm track. You also have a perm track. Perm track is for the permeability track, this particular track. And then inside of the perm track, you also have a curve that's perm. And then you have porosity track, and you have porosity inside of that track, right? So these are the different tracks and curves inside of those tracks, right? And in addition to that, it also allows you to adjust the borehole markers. The borehole markers are basically the wheel tops. It's going to allow you to actually change how the wheel tops are going to be displayed inside of this wheel section window. And in addition to that, you also have something that's called a background, right? The background is what? The background are those empty spaces between those wheel logs, right? In those empty spaces, the gray spaces, you can also display something. For example, you can, if you have built a three-dimensional model with petrophysical properties, petrophysical properties that's kind of distributed everywhere, right? Then you can actually fill up those regions with those petrophysical properties and see if there's any kind of correlation with wheel logs, right? If it's consistent or not. If you have three-dimensional seismic data, you have a three-dimensional seismic volume, and you have converted that seismic volume into the depth domain, right? Instead of time domain, into the depth domain, then you can display that seismic data between those whales and see if you have cross correlations between those seismic arrivals and those whale tops, the horizons, that kind of thing, right? So background. And let's not get into deviated tracks right now, right? And sometimes you would like to fill up a particular curve, right? So it's, for now, it's just display like curves. But sometimes you would like to fill up some regions of the track using color, right? And then curve filling underneath the track setting is going to allow you to do that, right? And maybe it's a good idea to leave those discussions to the next video.